Every new year, I think about where I was last year and do something of a retrospective about what has happened in the past year for me. And I think back to this time last year, we had just finished our first pandemic Christmas, and we were eagerly anticipating the rollout of a vaccine which would keep us safe and hopefully put an end to this pesky COVID-19. And we were happy, so happy to welcome in 2021. And wonderful things did happen in 2021. That rollout of the vaccine did happen, and it happened well. Canada is one of the countries that is top of the heap when it comes to vaccine being given to people. And we had so much hope in 2021, only to discover towards the end of 2021 that COVID-19 had not been eradicated. In fact, that a new variant, more infectious than anything previous to this variant, was, and still is, infecting people at an alarming rate in not just our country, but across the world. To add to that, we had some really tough things to deal with in 2021. We saw the discovery of the unmarked graves of innocent children who were buried without any farewell, without their families around, without any respect for their bodies. And perhaps even more shockingly, it was perpetrated by institutions that we thought that we could trust, religious institutions that we thought that we could trust. This shocked me, it shook me, and it clearly highlighted the painful history of the residential school system, something that I knew nothing about. We also noted political unrest. We noted protests against anti-masking, protests for masking, protests protesting the protesters. We saw protests against vaccinations, and again, protests protesting the anti-vaccination people. We saw fires. We saw floods, we saw hurricanes, tornadoes, windstorms. Just when we thought that we had turned the corner, something else seemed to come up and knock us back on our feet again. It just felt like a never-ending litany of bad news in 2021. And some of the good stuff was overlooked when we realized at the end of the year that COVID-19 was still with us. After all, we were willing to manage a COVID Christmas once, but twice was not what we had expected. So for some of us, where 2021 looked so hopeful at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, it was such a sad time because we still had to limit who we could be in connection with. And it felt like there was a sense of out of control. And so it had a sad and a disappointing ending in 2021. And we begin 2022 faced with more unknowns than we expected, certainly more than we want. And the question that I'm considering is, with all of these uncertainties, with all of these unknowns, how do we function intelligently? How do we function and continue to function with intention, with intelligence, rather than giving up? How do we build resiliency and maintain our stamina for these challenging times? How do we stay at peace with it all? Well, there are many ways to approach this question. And today I'm going to ask you to consider the element of faith. I am going to ask you to have faith that we will get through this, and to build your faith and to live into the faith that you have, that we will find solutions, and that this is not the end, it's just a continuation. The reason that it's important is that I'm sure that sometime in the last 22 months, some of you have experienced at least one, if not more, of a whole bunch of really complicated feelings. Feelings of helplessness, or being anxious, or being angry, or being irritated, or exhausted, overwhelmed, confused, sad, frustrated. Add any of those uncertainty emotions in there, and we have all been there to some extent in these last 22 months. In fact, it would be more concerning if we didn't feel some of those things, because we are human, and it is a normal experience to have these feelings when things aren't going the way we would consider normal, which, remember, is simply a setting on the dryer, as Barb Good reminds me quite frequently. The thing is that if we allow ourselves to stay in those places of anger, anxiety, feeling helpless, feeling hopeless, then what happens is we find ourselves going further and further into a downward spiral where we end up not functioning very well, where some of our reasoning may start to be questionable, where certainly our reactions become more quick rather than responding to things. We tend to react. And so one of the consequences of living in the state of anxiety, which comes from not having faith, if we allow ourselves to stay in that anxiety place, is that we end up making poor decisions. We end up harming our relationships. We end up in a place where we feel stuck. So the reason that we want to shift to a place of standing in faith is that it gives us more power to respond to life on life's terms. And so today I want to share with you some ideas about having faith, building faith, so that hopefully some of them can resonate with you, and you will find some comfort in restoring faith, which restores you to some place of functioning. The more that we can trust that we will get through this, that this too shall pass, then the more we will be able to respond to whatever life situations we are facing. And we will respond with more grace, with more gracefulness. We will respond with thoughtfulness, with intelligence, with patience. So here are some ideas. First, accept. Accept that discomfort is a part of life. Life includes ups and downs. It always has, it always will include positives and negatives, fun stuff and not so much fun stuff. God includes the sunshine and the rain, the fire and the flood, and the peaceful, serene day. God includes the winding path and the straight path. As Jesus said, God causes the sun to shine on the good and the bad, the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. We don't have to like it. We don't have to agree with it. We do want to live in that place where we accept that there are things that happen beyond our control. And we want to live within it as best we can, to show up as practically and positively as we can muster. When we argue against reality, we impair our own ability to function within it. What if we just accepted that life sometimes isn't fun? That life sometimes isn't comfortable. When we accept that it's true rather than resist it, we increase our ability to function. We increase our ability to respond, to pivot, to take action that makes sense, sane, sensible action. So accept that life has ups and downs, positives and negatives. And that brings to another point, and that is to allow for the mystery of life. So many people have experienced challenges that have shared how these challenges, which seemed like they were the end of the world for them, have been their greatest blessings. Personally, one of the hardest experiences of my life was when I experienced a betrayal of trust in a business relationship. I had been the general manager of a company for almost 10 years. The owner was an absentee owner and wasn't there very much at all, and she wanted to retire. And so the plan was that I would buy the business. And to make a long story short, it didn't work out. In fact, my employment was terminated. It was an awful experience. As I speak about it, I can feel it in my belly. I can feel it in my body still. It was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. The company closed a couple of years later. And I can't even tell you how devastating it was for me at the time. And yet, 4 years later, a pandemic happened. I think of that now and I think, wow, the financial and emotional impact, had I gone through with that whole business purchase the impact would have been absolutely enormous on me and on my family. There's more to life than meets the eye. There is more intelligence to life than we can understand at the time. What if we allowed for the mystery of life and accept that we don't have to understand it all? That even the things that seem most painful to us at one time have some form of intelligence inherent in them. And the next thing I want to encourage you to think about is to trust that life will continue to evolve. Be patient. It takes time. And we haven't actually been on this planet all that long. My grandfather, I think I've shared this with you before, my grandfather was born in 1896. That means in my lifetime, I've been directly exposed to over 125 years of history. And I did the math, and I did it several times because it just didn't compute for me that it could possibly be true. And it is. I then thought, well, how many of those 125-year lifespans that I've been exposed to have passed since the time of Jesus? And you will be surprised to know, I think, that it's fewer than 20. In fact, it's just over 16 years of 125-year lifespans, or years of history, since the time of Jesus. Think about that. So much has happened in 2,000 years, 100-year lifespans. So much has happened since the time of Jesus. Yes, we have much to learn, but things can change quickly, and we can learn quickly. On Christmas Day, not that long ago, in 2021, in French Guiana, the James Webb Telescope was launched into space. The commentator from NASA said these amazing words, and I quote, "Lift off from a tropical rainforest to the edge of time itself. James Webb begins a voyage back to the birth of the universe." End quote. From the time of Jesus to now, we're now sending a massive telescope into our solar system so that we can see far, billions of years back in time. Isn't that exciting? So much can change. We are meant to evolve. So trust that we will evolve. The next idea I have for you is to find the bliss in the mess. If I think back on that challenging time in my life that I spoke about, you might reflect back on a challenging time in your life. Can you identify some of the positives that happened in the midst of the pain? Perhaps we experienced moments of grace in the middle of that pain. Maybe we discovered a depth of strength and resilience about ourselves which we didn't know that we were capable of. Or perhaps our experience led us to choose work which makes a meaningful difference in the lives of others. Perhaps an experience you've had has helped to clarify your values, helping to choose what you want or how you will show up in the world. Maybe it will help you to choose how you parent, how you treat people, how you choose to eat or drink, spend money, save money. From these previously challenging times in our lives, I encourage you to find the bliss in the mess. Find the aspect of that incident that actually has added to your life. Find the bliss in the mess. And as a follow-up to that thought, recognize that our human tendency is to focus on the negative. Our human tendency is to be in what they call in psychology a loss frame of mind, focusing on the negative. I once heard Rachel Maddow, the MSNBC news reporter, who is perhaps one of the most admired journalists out there, share how sometimes she is bothered by one negative comment, even if she gets hundreds of positive comments. Can you relate? We've all had that experience, I think, where we can have 50 people say something wonderful, one person say yeah, but, or some sort of a criticism, and that is the piece that we hold on to. It is normal. It is a human thing to do. In her 10-minute TED Talk that I highly recommend that you watch, entitled A Simple Trick to Positive Living, social psychologist Alison Ledgerwort talks about her personal experience of how she becomes excited if a paper that she has written is accepted for publication, and how she's excited for a while and then she goes back to baseline by lunchtime, is her way of saying it. And then she shares about how if a paper is rejected, she feels dejected. But without that return to baseline by lunchtime. So if it's good, she's like, whoa, that's great, and gets right back to work. But if it's rejected, it stays with her. And if she receives news about another paper being accepted, even after, she can't stop thinking about the rejected paper. Ledgerwood goes on to tell us in this TED Talk that if you talk about a glass half full versus a glass half empty, and I'm going to quote this to you, quote, depending on how you describe the glass to people as half full or half empty, it changes how they feel about it. So if you describe the glass as half full, this is called the gain frame, because what you're focusing on what is gained. Then people will like it. But if you describe that same glass as half empty, a loss frame, then people don't like it. The same glass, that's the end of the quote. The same glass, if you say it's half full, they like it. If you say it's half empty, they don't like it. What was most interesting is that her research showed that once you've described a glass as half empty, it's really hard to change a person's perspective and have them see the glass as half full. As she puts it, once the loss frame gets in there, it sticks. This knowledge that our human tendency is to get stuck in the negative is powerful, because it can help us to understand ourselves and to be aware of our tendency to focus on the negative. And it is a reminder that, as Paul said in his letter to the Philippians, that what we want to do is whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. There is wisdom in those words from Paul, especially when we see them in the context of what Ledgerwood was talking about. And then another idea for you is to question, ask yourself, how much of this needs to be all-consuming for me? When our everyday world is turned topsy-turvy, it's somewhat of a shock at times when we've been, say, at a hospital and, heavily involved in the health of somebody, or we've found out something that is a diagnosis that we don't like, or we're going through something that is really painful. It can be really disconcerting to see that other people are going about their everyday business. And yet we could find comfort in that. It is a reminder that for the most part, our days aren't filled with the negative. They are filled with normal, everyday things. It's also really helpful to watch the rest of the natural world, which we are part of, to watch the birds flying, to go to the beach and see the tide coming in and going out, to enjoy the change of seasons, to see that the hummingbirds are still coming to the feeder. If we are feeling completely lost, it's sometimes really affirming and comforting to see that nature is continuing around us. Let it be a reminder to us that everyday normal things is where most of our lives are. Life will continue. And then finally, take time to be still. In today's society, we have so many distractions, so many demands, so much busy, and a sense of urgency that it may feel quite uncomfortable to be still. And yet it is in the quieter places, away from the bombardment of information and chatter. It is in the quiet that we give ourselves time to integrate and put what's going on in our world and in our lives into some form of perspective. So go for a walk. Turn off the radio. Turn off the television. Turn off the news. Don't just do something. Sit there. And if sitting causes you to fall asleep, then take a long shower or work in the yard or paint or do baking, something where you're engaged in doing something gentle without being absorbed in whatever the upset is that is going on in our world. Find whatever works for you. to get calm, to get still. Walt, my husband, finds that his most useful time for reflection is when he's busy shaving. That's the time when he can't watch TV, and even if the music's playing, it's quiet. It's a time to be still and allow for insight, allow for, what can I do in this situation? And do I need to allow it to consume me? So when it seems that life is out of control, when we wonder where God is, or why is this happening to me, or this shouldn't have been this way, or what have I done to deserve this? When we get to a point where we're feeling tired and we wonder if there's any point to it all, it just feels so never ending, then let us build our faith by remembering and truly trusting that there is no spot that God is not. That we want to accept rather than resist the reality of life, which includes the stuff that we don't want, that we don't agree with. Let us allow for the mystery of life, that we are part of the mystery of life. And rather than resist it, trust that it is unfolding with intelligence at some level, even if we don't understand it. And then let us insist on finding the bliss in the mess, finding the nugget of good that serves us now and serves humanity, even despite the pain. Find the bliss in the mess. And then take time to be still. Trust that life will evolve, and allow yourself time away from that overwhelm. Get rest, get perspective. These steps towards faith will help us to find calm and peace, will help us to function. Have faith. We will get through this. I bless you.